Learners, you are welcome to Joy Learning Basic Classroom. Our subject for today is computing, and the class is Basic 6. Basic 6, and the topic has to do with components of the computer system. Components of the computer system. I'm Mr. Peter Asamoah, your facilitator for this lesson. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV, and also follow us there. Okay, now let's move on to, we have the first slide that has to do with strand 1, and then the strand 1, we have introduction to computing. Introduction to computing, then sub-strand 1, we have generation of computers and parts of a computer and other gadgets. Okay, so let's move on to the other slide. We have our starter here. Now, on this slide, we have an image that we want you to identify. So identify the image below. Right, hope you've seen the image on the screen. So we have A as microphone, and then B, we have speech recognition, then we have C, speaker. So select the correct answer, A, B, and C. Right. I hope you are doing this at home. Good. So let's look at the correct answer. This one is speech recognition. So anytime you see this image on your phone, your computer, or any other electronic gadget, then it represents speech recognition. Okay, let's move on to our next starter. Identify the image below. You have an image shown on the screen, and we want you to identify. So the first, we have supercomputer, that's A, and B, we have computer user, and then C, we have artificial intelligence. So we want you to select the right answer. Good, and I hope you've done it. So let's look at the correct answer. The correct answer is artificial intelligence. Good. Clap for yourself for doing it correctly. Now, let's move on to the next starter. We have an image also. We want you to identify it. So A, we have RAM. Then B, we have CPU. Then C, we have ROM. Good. So select your answer. Right, I hope you've gotten your answer correct. So let's look at the correct answer here. The correct answer has to do with CPU, or Central Processing Unit. So that is the image shown on the screen. Very good. Now we are done with our starter. We are moving on to our lesson, or learning competencies or objectives. Our learning competencies or objectives. By the end of the lesson, the learners should be able to, 1, discuss the components of a computer system. Discuss the components of a computer system. Number 2, explain the term computer hardware. Explain the term computer hardware. Okay. Then the third one, identify the main computer hardware components with at least 5 examples each. Identify the main computer hardware components with at least 5 examples each. So these are our learning competencies that we are going to go through. All right, so keep on following us. Now, components of the computer system. There are three major components of a computer system. Three major components of the computer system. The first one, we have hardware. We have the hardware. Then the second one, we have software. And then the third one, we have the liveware or the humanware. So these are the three major components of the computer system. But our lesson today is going to focus on the first one that has to do with the hardware. Okay. So we are going to look at now, hardware and software need the human factor in order to make input and connectivity possible. So when you have hardware and software without the liveware, it means the computer cannot function or work. So always we need human factor to make our software and then hardware operational. Okay. Now we move on to the computer hardware. So this is an example of a computer hardware. Let's look at the explanation of a computer hardware. So these are the physical components of the computer system that can be seen and touched by the human hand. These are the physical components of the computer system that can be seen and touched by the human hand. Examples include we have mouse, keyboard, system unit, and monitor. So these are examples of the computer hardware, and we have an image also on the screen. Right? So we can touch this object we see on the screen, and we can also see it. Right? Now, we are going to look at the main computer hardware components. We have the classifications of computer hardware components. We are going to look at the classifications. The first one, we have the input devices. We have categorized hardware component into one, input devices. Then two, we have the processing devices. Then three, we have output devices. Then four, storage devices. Then we have five, communication devices. So these are the categories of hardware components of computer, right? So we are going to take this one after the other with their examples. So let's move on to the next slide. What are input devices? Now, I hope you can answer this question. So write your answer down, take your book, and try it at the house. Right. I hope you've been able to do it. So let's look at it. Now, input devices are computer hardware components that are used to send or feed the computer with data. So any device that we use to make data entries or we use to capture data into the computer is part of the input devices, right? So I hope your answer, you got it correct, right? Let's move on to, now we have examples of input devices. And we have an image on the screen. So this image is also an example of input device, and the name for this device is mouse, computer mouse. Okay, computer mouse. Then we have another image here also. This is microphone, and this microphone is also an input device. So we are only showing the examples of input devices. So we have the mouse, then we have the microphone here. Then let's move on to the next slide. We have other examples of input devices. this is also an input device. And this device is called joystick. Joystick. Then we have another image also, and this one is keyboard, or the computer keyboard. Right, so all these are examples of input devices. Then we have another example. We have this one to be light pen. Light pen is also an input device. Then we also have the other one to be stylus pen. Stylus pen. You have light pen, then you have the stylus pen. So they are all examples of input devices. Then we have other images also here. We have the scanner. The scanner is also an example of input device. Then the next or the other image has to do with graphics tablets or digitizer. You can call this digitizer or graphics tablet. So this one has a stylus pen, and we use the stylus pen to draw or write on the graphics tablet. Okay. Then other devices also, we have game controller. Then we have webcam. So all these are examples of input devices, and they are all hardware components. Now, so we are done with the input devices. The next category has to do with processing devices. So we are going to look at the devices that we use to process information or data into information. So processing devices are devices that manipulate or convert data into meaningful information. And then we have some images here, and let's look at the images. We have the first one to be microprocessor or the CPU. Microprocessor or the CPU, or can also call it processor. Now, this microprocessor contains some components that are called ALU, has to do with arithmetic logic units. Then you have the control units and registers. So all these components are embedded in the CPU or the microprocessor, right? Then we also have other processing devices here to be. This image, let me go back to the previous one. So this is called the GPU, Graphics Processing Unit. And this one is in the video card. So this is a video card. And this small microchip we see here is the CPU embedded in the video card. And that one supports the video card to process videos and other data. So this is GPU, and it's also an example of processing device. Okay. Then we have another image. We have the RAM. RAM, which stands for random access memory. During data manipulation, the RAM also supports the CPU to also process data. So it's also part of the processing devices. Then another image is on the screen, and this one is called the cache memory. We have an illustration also on the board. We have the CPU, cache memory, and then the main memory. So the cache memory acts as an intermediary between the CPU and the main memory, right? So cache memory is also an example of processing devices. Then cache memory is the fastest memory in the computer and acts as a buffer between RAM and then the CPU. So the cache memory always speeds up the work of the CPU. It always speeds up the work of the CPU. And that is the image on the screen. Okay. Then we are on the next category that has to do with output devices. So output devices are the devices that show or display information to the user. They are the devices that show or display information to the user. Right, so these devices are used to display or show information to the user. And we have example on the screen to be computer monitor. So this monitor is an example of an output device. Then we have another output device also here. This is called the printer. Printer, this is also an output device. We also have another output device here. This is plotter. Plotter, this is also an example of output device. Then we also have another example. We have the projector. Projector is also an output device. We also have another device that is headset or headphone. Headset or headphone, and this is also an output device. Then we come to the storage devices. Storage devices. So this is the next category. So the storage devices are hardware devices that are capable of keeping or storing information for future use or references. So anytime you want to store or save your data, we use storage devices to do that. And the example on the screen, we have flash drive or pen drive. So there's a flash drive or pen drive that we use to store our information. We also have another device, and this one is called SD card or secure digital card. We also use this to store data, mostly on phones or computers, sometimes in our digital cameras. Then we also have another storage device. This is called the hard disk. Hard disk drive. Hard disk drive. Okay. Then we also have another storage device. This is called optical disk. Optical disk. So this can be either, let's go back to the optical disk. Right. So we can have the CDs or the DVDs. So either CDs or DVDs. So we have the optical disk here. Then we also have storage devices like RAM or the main memory of the computer. This is also a temporary storage device used to store data during processing. So it's also a storage device. That's a RAM or main memory or the random access memory. Random access memory. Then we are on the communication devices. Communication devices. So we have an example to be network interface card. Network interface card. So this is a component of the network interface card, and this image here is a network cable. So when you want to connect computers to network, we fix this cable in the network interface card port to connect our computers to network. So this is also an example of communication devices. We also have other examples of communication devices like switch. So this switch is also an example of a communication device. And during network, we use this switch to connect more computers on one network. So this is a switch. Then we also have another communication device here, and this one is router. Router. So when you are connecting one network, or when you have more networks and you want to join them to other networks, we use the router to do that, to connect to external networks. So there's a router. Then also we have hub. Hub, and this is also a communication device, and it's also used to connect computers together on a network. Then we have the transceiver. Is also a communication device used to transmit data over network. Then you have this also as the satellite dish, also a communication device when you want to connect network. With this one also transmit data over network. Then we also have communication device also like mobile phone. So mobile phone is also a communication device that we can use to communicate or send information. Some mobile phones, they have the Bluetooth and then the infrared, and they all make it possible for sending and receiving of data. Then, so this is a smartphone. We also have, so we come to the end of our communication devices. The next screen or the next slide, we have reflections. So we are going to reflect on all the things we've learned so far. So there are three main components of the computer system. So these include, so we want you to mention the three main components of the computer system. So you take your book and you write down the three main components of the computer system, right? So I hope you are doing this. Write the three main components of the computer system. All right, so let's go through the answers. The first one, we have hardware. Then the second one, we have software. Then the third one, we have liveware or humanware. So these are the three main components of the computer system, right? So our next reflection has to do with the main hardware components are categorized into which categories? So you mention the categories of the main hardware components. So the computer components, we have categorized them into some categories. So you mention them, right? So take your book and write your answers down. Then later we all discuss the answers. And I hope you are on it. Very good. So let's discuss the answers. The first one, we have input devices. So categories of hardware components. The first, we have the input devices. Then we have processing devices. The third one, we have the output devices. Then number four, we have storage devices. That's number 4. Then number 5, we have communication devices. Right. So these are the hardware components of the computer system. Right. So our next slide, we have our assessment task. Now we have some components lettered from A to E, and we want you to identify the components. So the first component is lettered A. So you write the name of this component. Then the next component is lettered B. You also write the name of this component. So you have A, then we have B. So your answers will be sent to us through our email, joylearningtv@myjoyonline.com. joylearningtv@myjoyonline.com. So we'll go to the next slide to look at the other components. So we have C. So the image letter C, we also identify the hardware component lettered C. Then we have another component lettered D. You also identify these components. Then the last one, we have E, right? So from A to E, identify these components and you send your answer to us through our email, joylearningtv@myjoyonline.com. Right? So we've come to the end of this lesson, and we want to let you know that videos of this lesson will be uploaded to you on our YouTube channel at Joy Learning TV. So when you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV, you will get videos of these lessons. Right? My name is Peter Asamoah, and your facilitator for the computing lesson. I hope you found the lesson very interesting and impactful. Now, say goodbye, and then we'll meet again next time. All right, bye.